This is a 3-string guitar, and these are a guitar slide that I've made recently for a guy named Del Puckett, who runs a YouTube channel, and I'll leave a link for that in the description. Del taught me how to build that guitar, and recently I've been making slides and some mugs for him as merch for his YouTube channel. And they are part and parcel of the shrinkage. So if you're just tuning into this, what I suggest you do is go back to my video on shrinkage and note-taking, because you're going to need note-taking if you're going to build yourself a decent glaze lab. So let's go through the glaze lab and let's see what I have here. And what we're going to start with is note-taking and measuring equipment. So you should recognize this from note-taking. And again, that shrinkage thing, dialing these in for shrinkage, I made spider molds for my my extruder for these, and the spider molds had to be adjusted so that they would fit a number of different fingers, and so they can't be too fat, they can't be too small, and they also fit on different fingers. And that was quite a trick to do, to adjust that shrinkage into a place where I actually had 2 spider molds that would give me exactly what I wanted and would fit the majority of people. So that's an example of using shrinkage, and that's also a great place to find out about keeping notes. So you're going to want to weigh out your materials, and I am now the proud owner of this kitchen scale. It was like 11 bucks at Walmart. It's not an expensive deal, but it doesn't do everything you want it to do. If you have an option to get a triple beam balance, they are more expensive. Sometimes you can pick them up used, and they allow you to go into the portions of a gram. So if you're doing a 100-gram batch, which is what I recommend to start with, you're doing a 100-gram batch, and it calls for 0.5% of cobalt carbonate, then you can get a 0.5 gram. So that makes it much easier. On this scale doesn't go down to that kind of, you can't break a gram up on this. And they sell other scales that go with this, little gold scales that would be helpful. And the gold scales, what they do is they are enable you to get into hundreds of a gram, so you can figure out exactly what you do. But then you have to own 2 scales. Another thing, I don't have one to show you, but if you're buying a triple beam balance scale, there are ones that have a basket on the top of it, and that basket holds a bowl that's stainless steel, and it's a pouring bowl, so you can tip it and pour your stuff into a container. You don't want that. What you want is a flat top, so you can take it and set a larger container on it that you can put 1,500 grams of material in, and then dump that into your overall batch when you're doing larger batches. So I can do larger batches on this. It's perfectly capable of doing that, and I can put a bucket on here, and that's great. But at the same time, you don't want to have so many scales running around your shop that you have to keep track of them and maintain them all. So I would recommend a triple beam balance. Another feature of a good triple beam balance is there are 3 beams, and they're a little like on a scale in the old doctor's office. There are these weights that you slide back and forth. On the modern triple beam balance, they have a dial for the gram, so you can, with like doing a combination of school locker, you can dial in 1/10 of a gram or a 0.5 gram or 3/10 of a gram. You can dial it in, and it's very, very handy. And it's probably a little bit more costly, but get the flat top with a dial if you can get it. If you're buying a used one and you're flicking that little weight back and forth, I did that forever, and it's not that big of a deal, especially if it's a good price. But anyway, on that, I use these cups a lot, and I'll show it over here. These are little plastic cups that come with a lid, and I can weigh one out, and so this cup weighs 3 grams. Now I can put that on my scale and fill it full of materials, and then dump those materials into something that I'm going to mix it in. And if I forget to zero out my scale, which I can do, zeroing that out means I put that on there, I push a button, and the scale goes to 0 and doesn't weigh in the cup. But I can always reduce or remove that 3 grams from my calculation, and that's really handy again when you're doing small stuff. You're in a gram area, and you're putting that on there, and you can't zero your scale out, and calls for a half a gram, you're going to put, you know, you're going to put 3.5 grams in there, I guess, basically, or you're going to reduce subtract the 3 grams from your overall weight. I like these because what I can do with them as I'm mixing my glazes, these are just about right for a 100-gram batch. And you'll recognize that number if you're looking at my my class on note taking. I can fill these full of the glaze and dip it and test it, put a number on the top of it that corresponds with what's in the book, and keep that. So this is from 2019, so those have been around for a while, and I'm still experimenting with them. I can rehydrate them, and I can grind them up, and I can get back to them later on. This is a useful device for mixing. This is a rubber bowl with a rounded spatula, and you can mix your stuff in there. My wife used this in the dental industry for mixing amalgam, and you can get in there and you can scrape around and clean it all out, and then dump it into into your little cup. That's helpful, and it works, and it's on the cheap. But what I really like are Oster blenders. This is our family blender, so I don't use this in the studio, and but what a lot of people don't understand about blenders is you can take the bottom off of this blender, and you can take a standard cheapo jar. This is one we salvage. I forget what comes in this, honey or something. And you can screw that on there like so with your glaze ingredients and your water in there, and then you can put that back on your blender and hit the button, and then pull that out, dump that into your cup. I like to have a couple of little rubber squeegee little scrapers around to get everything out of there. And then once it's in your cup and your cup is deep enough, then you can dip your test tile into your cup and go from there. And then just put the lid on. Set this aside, put the lid on, set it aside, and you're on your way. Rinse this out, and rinse out your blender device, and you're back on. So you can go really, really fast and get a really good blend without screening your materials that way. One thing that happens is these wear out. The minerals and the abrasives get into the little propeller bit there and chew this thing up. So these can be bought individually, the little propeller deal. They're not cheap. What I find is it's cheaper to buy the entire blender at a yard sale than to actually buy these. But in a pinch, you can do that. And I tell you, it's a great way to be able to mix your chemicals really quickly. And where it really comes in handy for me is if I have a base glaze and I'm running a spectrum like on Colbalt. I want to see what Cobalt's going to do. So I start with a half a gram of Colbalt and add another half a gram of Colbalt. And in between each one, I blend it and mix it up and dip. So I can, iron might take 10 grams of iron to give you a 10%, and you're starting at 1. So you got 10 tests to do, and bang, 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 all in the same jar, and it goes really, really fast. On that note, I have been throwing test tiles for years, and I like throwing test tiles. I think they're great. That's my mystery glaze. But recently, since I've been making these guitar slides, I've got a ton of guitar slide blanks around because they're extruded, and you end up making them faster than you can use them up. And so now I'm using these as test tiles and using an underglaze pencil to mark my numbers down here, and then dip them, and that works really well. And they're nice and stable, and they're a good test tile. So if you have an extruder and you're making extrusions, that's something to consider. Is you could extrude these too. I've had an extruder die for these before, where these pop out, and you can go pretty fast with that. Okay, where are we? So let's go to buying materials. You can buy all sorts of materials, and I'm going to break this into 3 groups of materials to buy. I'm going to break it into 1 pound lumps that you would buy for a pound, or 2 or 3 pound lumps. This is Custer Feldspar. That was actually a 5 pound bag. Here's a 5 pound bag of Frit 3110. And then the other one we're looking at is 50 pound bags. So I will try and leave. Now I will make myself do it. I haven't ever figured out how to do it, but I will try to leave a couple of lists. I'm going to leave a list in the description for 1 pound items to buy for your lab, and 2 or 3 pound items to buy for your lab, and then 50 pound items to buy for your lab. What happens is this has been several years. I probably put my lab together again 4 or 5 years ago, and I think I spent about $150 on stuff. It's probably twice that now, but I spent about $150 on 1 pound items. And so, like, here's strontium carbonate, and strontium is a good substitute for barium, so I want barium and strontium in my lineup. But this is a little Ziploc tub, and all I have to do is open it up with my 1 pound of material in there. And I haven't bought any more strontium for this. This is just there for testing. So I have these lined up. So here's soda ash. So I have these lined up, and if I'm working on a body of glazes that I like, I can keep these on my table, and I can quickly open them up. I can use a spoon and take out what I want out of them and put it on my scale, and I can go pretty quickly. And a lot of these 1 pound items are probably never going to get replenished. I just don't use them that much. And then there's stuff that's cheap, like bentonite. So here's a bentonite, and you maybe put like 2% of this in a glaze to keep things in suspension. You don't use very much of it at all, and so a 5 pound bag of this, even if you're mixing large amounts of glaze, can last you for quite a while. But a 50 pound bag is really cheap, so eventually you might end up buying 50 pounds just to be done with it. This is about 5 pounds of Gerstley borate, and I've got a small one of these in Gerstley borate too. But if I'm mixing up big amounts of glaze, large amounts of glaze, and it calls for 10% Gerstley borate, which happens to be like 150 grams or 200 grams, I can go here and open this up and get to my Gerstley and not have to break out a 50 pound bag. 50 pound bags of Gerstley are also very expensive, so you might find now that you're not buying 50 pounds of Gerstley borate. You're not buying 50 pounds of Frit 3124. What you're doing is buying 5 or 10 pounds, and you're keeping those in 5 or 10 pound containers that are handy to use in your lab experience, but not so expensive that you have to go out and buy them. And that's going to be completely relevant to what glazes you're mixing. You may get into a series of glazes or a body of glazes, and you don't use Gerstley borate. I've tried to eliminate it as much as I can because it's gotten really expensive. But one of the neat tricks with Gerstley borate is you can take almost any cone 10 glaze and add 10% Gerstley borate to it, put it in and watch it melt at cone 5-6. And so, I mean, it's a very, very valuable material. You can do the same thing with Frits, but, Frits are just about as expensive, if not more expensive, than Gerstley these days. So it's up to you. And Gerstley has some problems, including tracking and availability. I mean, it's becoming less and less dependable to get it. At one point, they were grinding up the rocks in the parking lot, I understand. So OM4 is a cheap material. It's a ball clay. It's used in bulk. So, you're mixing a 10,000 gram batch of glaze. You might have 1,500, 2,000 grams of OM4 in that batch of glaze. So this is one of the materials I would buy in a 50 pound bag, because ball clay is clay. It's relatively inexpensive. Feldspar is the same way. Nepheline Syenite, one of my favorite Feldspars, especially for cone 6 glazes, and oxidation. And so it's dependable. It's kind of synthetic, so it's sort of reliable, and I really like it as a constituent. You use a fair amount of it, and because it's a real glaze former. And so 50 pound bag, but I've broken it down into my 5 pounds. So when I'm sitting here in my lab, I can pull the glaze materials off the shelf that I want to play with for the afternoon, and I can easily put them back just like it was a library and pull them back and forth. And I can work in an area that's this big and keep myself contained. Let's see, what else is there? Okay, so that's about it. My glaze lab's quite simple. I love published glazes. I like to go gold prospecting, and one of the things that the gold prospectors tell you is if you're looking for gold, go where the gold has been found before. Don't try beating your way out through the wilderness, because you're going to, go where the old timers found gold and then start searching in that area, because there's gold there. I feel the same way about glazes. Lots of published glazes. Glazy.org. I'm trying to remember the name of the gal that runs that. She's got a great Instagram channel. Sue McLeod, I think. I will try and find a link for her and put it in the description. But you can flip through glazy.org and you can look through hundreds, if not thousands, of pictures of different glazes, and try and understand if that's a glaze that you're interested in, you want to use, and then pull it out, do some experiments, put it in your lab, mix a few 100-gram batches of it, and run it on a test tile, and then start manipulating it. And then you can take it back to glazy.org, you can log it into their system, and you can look and see how it relates to the other glazes, whether it's stable or not, whether it's something that you want to make the investment in and having tested. And most of the glazes that I've ever used, including the ones that I've semi-invented, because I'll say semi-invented, I always give everybody else credit for it, are glazes that I've seen that I liked and that somebody gave me the recipe for, and I was able to take that recipe and play with it in 100-gram batches and find out what was going on with it and test it out, see if I liked it, and if I did, then I moved ahead. And I've done all sorts of crazy stuff for other potters who have lost Gerstley Borate, for example. When we lost Gerstley Borate about 10-12 years ago, where I was taking their reduction copper glazes that were copper reds and manipulating them using Laguna Borate and doing all that kind of stuff. Being able to have that ability to manipulate somebody else's glaze, but have a good starting point. Most of the glazes seem to have been invented and published, at least the ones that I'm interested in, and so if you're struggling with looking at becoming a glazing person, that's something that would really help you out. Another thing that'll help you out is reference books. So I have a number of books that I really like. I'm going to go over here and grab a few of them. I'll just say this is probably my most helpful book. It's Val Cushing's handbook, and so you've got panels in here that are unity molecular formulas of Frits and Feldspar comparison charts and material lists and the molecular formulas for individual materials and common colorants and how they produce color and all that stuff, plus a lot of glaze theory. There's a lot of stuff in here. Batch limits, that's wonderful to know, and that's what you're going to get a lot of, is kind of the batch limit information off of glazy.org. But it's going to tell you, what you can put into a glaze and have it be stable. And then it has a nice glossary of recipes in the back here with the formulaic comparisons and the thermal expansion and everything else to get you kind of into the ballpark. This is a great book. It was $32 when I bought it. I have no idea what it is now, but you might be able to find one on the internet used at a better price. And then this little thing is a materials and for traditional ceramics, and it was produced by the ceramics industry in January 1984. And it goes through everything that you would want to have and tells you what it does, where it came from, how it works, what its components are, and everything else. This is a great thing to have. I got this when I was in grad school, and I absolutely love it. And I've made lots of copies of it for people, and you ought to be able to find one of those. And then I think one of the most helpful books that I've ever found, if you want to go down the rabbit hole of glaze discovery, Ian Curie's Stoneware Glaze is a systematic approach. And he's doing baseline and triaxial blends. So what that means is he's taking 3 pots of glaze, 3 little things of glaze, and he's taking so much of this one, so much of this one, so much of that one, and he's moving it in a mathematical construction so that he gets this wide and varied graph of these glazes just using 3 little pots of glaze. And that's an oversimplified explanation of what he's doing, but this thing is quite in depth, and if you want to go deep into glazing, especially if you want to make your own glazes or you want to mix other glazes to create your own glaze, then this would be a great book to do. I have discovered in my trip down ceramics lane that there are glazes that I cannot make work dry. I have to manufacture the glaze wet and mix it with another glaze wet to get the glaze that I want. When I try just doing it dry components by the gram and mix them all together, it doesn't work. Why? I have no idea. Maybe one of you guys can answer out there. I would love to know why that works or doesn't work, but that's what it is. So that's my glaze labs. Very simple. And I hope you found this helpful. If you do, please, like I always say, please subscribe and leave a comment. This was a request from somebody after looking at one of my videos to do an explanation of what my glaze lab looks like. And so there you go. I do requests. But you know, your subscriptions and your comments keep me in the game. That's kind of what I'm doing this for, including trying to get helpful information out there that I don't think a lot of other people are doing. And that's one of the reasons I chose this show you my darn glaze lab thing. And so I really appreciate you taking the time, especially if you've made it this far in the video and you're still here to subscribe and leave a comment. And send me some requests, and I'll continue to try and make you happy. So thanks much. Here's mud in your eye.